cannot believe that this administration would have ever been elected 4 years ago if we had known then what we know today. But we are entering a new era in which we must, as Americans, demand stature and size in our national leadership. Leadership which is open and leadership which is receptive to the problems of all Americans.
I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is Triloquy, the podcast that strives to musically engage all Americans and beyond. I think we do that with the mix of stuff that's on here.
That's very aggressive. Don't you think engaged is like, you're part of a gear system, or, disengaged becomes a negative?
Maybe engaged is one of those ugly public radio words that's hung over still that I need to get rid of.
Well, it's in the wedding world a lot, right?
Oh,
to become engaged.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't plan on doing that. Shout out to Dell. We don't participate in patriarchal structures like marriage.
Testify.
That's a different opus.
50 years old, still undefeated.
Speaking of which, I want to shout out Robin from Maine, who sent me this really nice message about Triloquy and all sorts of stuff. And he told me to make sure that I was taking it easy on you because when you make it to 50, there's something to celebrate there. As we cheers, did we not?
We did.
And cheers again. Bravo, you did it.
Thanks a lot, man.
Welcome to the 68th opus of the Triloquy podcast. So great to have you here. In addition to shouting out Robin, I want to send a special shout out to the Sphinx Organization. This opus of Triloquy is brought to you in part by Sphinx. I'm announcing their virtual gala coming up here in a couple weeks. Today's guest, Mr. Carlos Simon, is going to talk a little bit about that virtual gala, a bit of his music, and many other things in the third movement as he takes a stand.
And that was a recent interview for you, though, wasn't it? Wasn't that just in the last couple of days?
Oh, with Carlos Simon? Yeah,
right.
I did that today, actually, earlier today.
So this is hot.
Yeah,
this is still cooling.
Yeah, and he has some music that's pretty hot, too, that I can't wait to share. I also wanted to shout out, Scott, all of our sister and brother podcasts out there. I feel like I've been on a little bit of a press tour explaining myself to everybody. So shout out to Classical Gab Fest. Shout out to Conversation for Adults. Special shout out to Jimmy Israel. I had an especially great time there. Shout out to Opera Box Score out of Chicago. I also want to shout out the Long Long Foundation with whom I did some work last week. I did a social media takeover. I kind of took them into the world of Garrett McQueen, the things I do all day. And then the following day, I did an interview with one of their featured artists. So on Instagram Live, I had never done an Instagram Live. So, even they've got me, the 33-year-old, looking like the old man in front of some of these people.
Nice. Yeah. How does that feel? To not know what's going on for a minute. I've also been on a very intense interview tour. Radar and I are deep into the intricacies of man's best friend and what that actually implies.
So you're talking about just spending more and more time together.
Well, he believes that sort of a identification for him implies lesser or a sidekick role.
Did he tell you that?
And that's what I'm gathering. We have very much a Han Solo Chewie relationship going on. So basically what I'm saying is I've hit the spot in this pandemic where I'm having full-on conversations with myself. So and I'm wondering what's going to happen when I finally pick a fight.
With yourself?
Yeah, who's going to win that?
It'll be like that scene in Liar Liar.
I'm kicking my ass, do you mind?
Look at us already at it. Listen, sorry. Okay. I also wanted to shout out, before we got to the first movement, the Schubert Club. I interviewed Lawrence Brownlee, if you know who that is, phenomenal tenor. Just, my way of saying shout out to all of the sister and brother organizations, lots of work out there, lots of support. I really appreciate it. I already mentioned that Carlos Simon is going to be the third movement guest today. In the downbeat for today, I haven't even talked about that yet. You heard the late Shirley Chisholm, the first woman to run for president, a black woman, but also, the first woman. When, she talks about, something being good, leadership that is good, equitable, whatever word you want to put in there for all Americans. That's something that I'm going to go into a little bit in the triloquy today. But there's also a political implication to the movement, the music we put in the second movement. We're going to talk about Shostakovich, a black composer named Ulysses K. There's all kind of stuff coming up. How many minutes are we at? I hate when we spend a lot of time in the announcements.
We are 5 minutes deep.
Okay, here we go. Let's check our accidentals.
I need to, I guess, put a natural by this. The last opus of Triloquy was titled Kobayashi Maru, and that is from a line that I used talking to Todd Steed that ended up in the trash bin.
The recycle bin. It didn't quite make the cut. But, we talked with Todd for over an hour.
Yeah.
We already have the people here long enough. So,
okay. So, let me just go ahead and get to it. If you're not old enough to remember Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
I'm raising my hand right now, everyone.
Okay. So, it's there, but it's also in an episode of The Office between Dwight and New Dwight.
Okay.
Where they talk about basically the Kobayashi Maru is a training exercise that they put Starfleet commanders through that has no way to win. No matter what direction that you go in, something happens that you can't get out of it. And Kobayashi Maru was the name of the ship that was in distress that's used in the exercise.
Oh, so an exercise that's impossible to solve, but...
Right. But everybody goes through it, and the only way to get out of it is to cheat. And I was talking about how right now I am in a Kobayashi Maru situation, at work, because we're still doing this podcast. Mm-hmm. And, my quote on your termination really pissed some people off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And but I'm going to say this right now. I said what I said, and I am ready to be proven wrong on that time frame because it seems even further out to me now. But
based on what has been happening,
but
as we said earlier before we cut on the mics, people are hearing you're just give in to it. And I think that's the issue. Like saying it's 10 to 15 years down the line, that may be true, but that doesn't mean we can't challenge and try to change what you see as this reality.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I sure wish that people could have been there in the interview because we were like, oh yeah, I mean, this, everything moves really slow. I had no idea what portion she was going to use. What I was hoping that she would use is that part where I said the worst thing that you can do to a person who has been advocating for change for most of their adult life is say, okay, I hear you and we need more time. Because isn't that exactly what I was advocating for? And the only and I know that it is irritating and it's a terrible way to advocate.
But right. But still, we shouldn't give up for the sake of things taking time.
Yeah, but that's
all I'm saying.
That's not what I was saying with that quote.
Are you upset about it or something?
I took some heat.
Sure.
I raised some eyebrows.
Well, what did they say about being in the kitchen and heat and all that sort of thing, huh?
Yeah, I'll go sit on the porch, man.
That's a long way from Kobayashi Maru, who composed the music for all of that So it's not Star Wars, it's Star Trek.
Correct.
Do you know the name of the composer or composers behind Star Trek?
I don't.
I looked it up real quick. So it says Dennis McCarthy, Ron Jones, and Jay Chataway. So maybe you can't speak to which of these men wrote some of the most famous, lines from Star Trek. But there's some iconicism around some Star Trek music, right?
Oh yeah, that theme for sure. And there's variants on it that's threaded throughout the films, different fanfares or marches or whatever.
So yes, A Natural Dare. We're definitely going to talk about the sort of Daniel Elder saga, which everyone has been throwing around social media. Excuse me, I'm drinking some coffee to try to settle dinner a little bit. So we're going to talk about Daniel Elder and all of that. I've gotten a lot of messages about, I hope you addressed that. But before we went there, I wanted to just acknowledge what's been going on with Lara St. John. So if you don't know, a while back, months ago, maybe a year or more now, it's hard to keep up with time, she made sexual abuse allegations against folks at the school she went to. And of course, the unfortunate truth is that when, women have the courage to come forward, there are all of these questions. There's everything but belief for them. So, she had to go through all of that. A few days ago, September 23rd, it says here, an article came out with the headline, Top Music School Finds Sexual Abuse Allegations from Violinist Credible. So after all of this time, after all of that heartache, the sleepless nights, the nightmares, I don't mean to, apply any emotions to her experience, but I'm just saying, just imagining the very difficult time it is to go through not only sexual abuse, that's the big part, but also it being public and it being dragged into headlines and all this stuff. So
how does it impact your career?
Your practice, your, everything. I don't want to go too much into it because I'm actually asking Lara St. John onto the show to talk about some things. Not only that, probably not mainly that, but since I plan on asking her on, having her on, I wanted to just give her the opportunity to go into as much or as little as she wanted to without we two men here digging into this.
Right, but this just goes to show you how time is distorted, because I thought it was even longer than months ago. I thought it was like years ago that there were rumblings of that.
Well, it happened years ago.
Okay.
It being a headline, at least in front of my eyes, wasn't all of that long ago for the first time. That's what I'm saying.
Right, but it's just my time is so distorted.
Right.
The pandemic and everything. I don't even know where this is Monday, yeah?
Today is Monday. We record on Mondays.
Here we go.
Yeah, so huge shout out and so much support, a huge sharp to Lara St. John. Again, the courage it takes to come forward and to be public about that thing, especially at an institution like the one that she went to, that she was connected to. So many incredible recordings and performances out there by Lara St. John. Here's one of my faves. So, my homie Eric over in Seattle, he said, today we might have to premiere the double flat. Have you heard of it? Do you know the concept of a double flat?
I don't. Help me out.
And I don't want to turn this into a music theory lesson for everyone, but basically, when you're talking about Western music and scales, every scale is supposed to have every letter, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, or whichever one you're starting on. So for some scales, when you start adding in accidentals, for that to work, for every letter to be in the scale, some notes require double flats or more often than not double sharps. So, you'll have an, E double sharp that actually sounds like an F sharp, but in the context of that scale scale in that key, it's an E double sharp.
Okay.
Or in the way that an A double flat, sounds to the ear like a G, but because of the key, it's an A. So anyway, shout out to all of my music theory teachers, Paula Turner especially from high school, who first introduced me to the concept of double flat. So, and also shout out to Eric from Seattle Symphony. This article, this blog by Daniel Elder is getting a double flat from me. So we've been talking, I feel like, a few weeks now about some of the backlash, the so-called white lash connected to equitable work in the arts and in classical music. His article, and the only reason I'm naming him is because I think it's very important for people to find this and read this blog just to understand the realities of what's going on out here. So the title of the blog is called "Equity Silences the Muse." Now that title in itself is a little violent, a lot violent.
For those who are unfamiliar with violent in this case, why do you choose that word?
Because when we, and I'm thinking about the Black Panthers when I say that, one of the things that they really fought for, the first, Black Panther Party, was that equal education was violent and that it didn't set up young black kids to go out into this world and work or do whatever they wanted to do. Lack of nutrition is violent because that is, keeping nutrients from, the black body and killing off black people. So when I call that title violent, what I mean is by naming equity and equitable work as something bad, as something that silences the muse, as he titled here, you're taking away the rights of so many people, not only their access to music, but their music and their art form. So when I say it's violent, that's what it means. I don't think it's playing nice to attempt to shut the doors of so-called classical music that we've been working tirelessly to kick open.
I was just making sure that I knew how you were calling it.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go through all of this honestly, but it's a lot of the language of the erasure of the white male, and the argument that I've seen from other people's blogs and responses and all that sort of thing was that his music was a little mediocre anyway. So the fact that people aren't booking you for things means I think that's just a straight up read. So the reason that people aren't booking for you or putting your music on or whatever is because there's better music out there. I'm going to be real with you, Scott. I didn't pay much, and this is no shade, I didn't pay that much attention to choral music anyway before moving to Minnesota. I mean, was choral music your jam back in Nebraska?
No.
Now, I obviously appreciate it and have grown in appreciation for it since moving to choir land here. But, in a field that's so crowded, especially with COVID, you can't have live choirs and, it's not the time to, as a white male composer of choral music, to talk about folks are trying to erase you, especially when there are whole black choirs out here that are doing phenomenal work. Think about Exigence from Sphinx.
Oh, that was such a performance. That was amazing.
There's stuff like that exists.
Yeah.
And we have this person, complaining because his stuff isn't making it. I can't. I just can't. I can't even.
When pieces like this come out, I add 3 months into my calculus on how long a transition would take. When defense pieces like this come out, I'm like, okay, it's going to take X number of months to deprogram or disinfect whatever reaction comes from this piece.
Let me read a little excerpt here for the people. The end of this one paragraph says, in this new age, quote, there is no such thing as sexism towards a man or racism towards a Caucasian, since their male and white privileges shield them from vulnerability to such attacks, the new philosophy sagely retorted. all debate was closed. How very expedient for these new supporters of equity. This new age of diversity seemed destined to be defined by an unavowed double standard. So, more of what we've been, looking at from other folks lately.
Says the man whose next blog post is Why I Removed Commenting.
Yeah. And didn't you, was that the next one? I don't
Yeah.
Shout out to, I want to shout out Jonathan Gibbs, who put me onto this. He called me on Saturday and he was like, listen, you need to talk about this. And I got a couple messages from people saying, please just drag him out in the triloquy. I decided to put him here in the accidentals because we have other things to talk about in the triloquy. I was talking about maybe last week or the week before, I brought up a blog and I didn't name the author. So I just want to, circle back around and reiterate. I'm naming this author Daniel Elder because I really want everyone to go out here, if he doesn't delete it or block it, and read what folks like me and Scott are pushing back against, the changes we're trying to make. When Scott says, changes are 10 to 15 years in the future, what he's thinking about is the existence of pieces like this. So there's a link to this in the description. If you're on some other platform, just Google Daniel Elder, Equity Silences the Muse, and please be a part of understanding that there is some real shit being thrown at equitable work and people doing that equitable work, especially in this so-called classical music. So obviously we aren't going to share any of his music here, but is there any choral music that you do sort of gravitate toward? We mentioned Exigence, right? And actually Exigence is performing at the virtual gala for Sphinx that's coming up. So
cool.
How about we give the people a little taste of
Nice.
Exigence here?
For those of you who haven't heard, Thursday of last week, petitions were turned into NPR management for the Current and for Classical Minnesota Public Radio to unionize, and with the hope that they would voluntarily accept that petition.
So, of course, I was, in on it, doing my part and keeping things under wraps and, being a part of the conversations, being vocal about what I would want, if I were, as a member of that union there. I'm going to get into that a little bit more, my feelings in the second movement and maybe and I think in the triloquy a little bit. But just for folks who don't understand the implications surrounding that, Scott, I wonder if you could explain why this is significant, especially in this moment. Employees at Minnesota Public Radio, American Public Media, seeking to unionize.
Well, I think if you check out the social media presence of NPR music unions, it will give you the entire scope of the reason that the petition was given. But I can tell you that having a larger say in how we move forward in this time and in this medium was front and center for Classical Minnesota Public Radio, as well as diversity in the broadcast and the hiring practices. However, the Current got deep. They got specific and they said that they felt, and I'm not. I'm not spilling any tea by saying this because it's online and it's in their petition for unionization, that it was centering whiteness, and that voices of the people of color was being minimized, and that of women as well, and that was very clear in their portion of the petition.
What was the I think I'll save that for because full disclosure, there's a level of frustration that I felt learning about this, and now when you're talking about the specifics that the current is getting into when it comes to some of this equitable work, to not hear about those specifics, to not see those specifics on the classical side of things, is just a little it's a little crunchy.
I don't have it memorized. Like I said, the whole petition from each entity is at NPR Music Unions, both on Instagram and on Twitter, and if they have a web presence, I don't know about it.
Well, unionization isn't going everywhere as far as public radio, but there are definitely certain conversations that are starting to spring up, and one of them is ownership. I want to shout out Julian Wiley, who writes for Current. He wrote a piece that included me that talked about Triloquy and the ownership of this intellectual property that we have. Of course, as I love to bring up, Joe Budden and the Spotify contract, which is now done, so they're separated, so many people are talking about the ownership of intellectual property, and that includes, lately public radio stations and public media, institutions. So I was a part of that. It was a really interesting article, and when I think back on Triloquy, I'm grateful, as I said in my official statement following my termination, I'm really grateful that we have a way to own this intellectual property, but that's just not the case, unfortunately, for everyone. I wonder if there are bits of intellectual property that you would hate to go without, if and whenever, you decide to separate from APM.
See, I look at it a little bit differently than you do. I mean, obviously, being able to take the first season of Triloquy was huge. Yeah. That was a
but other than Triloquy, I mean, you've been with the company for 14 years,
right? Actually, October will make 14 years. That's right. But I think about Hop Notes, and if I were to try to start it again, there's so much that I would do differently. Mm-hmm. And I would treat that as like I don't know. We were talking about Stravinsky, and he's going to be in the second movement. So let's talk a little bit about the Firebird. The idea of springing from the ashes of something else. Something that's a clearer vision of what you had in mind, mm-hmm. or maybe truer to the idea that you initially pitched.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about Shostakovich in the second movement.
Did I say Stravinsky?
Yes. but the point, but the point still stands. And even beyond public media organizations, the idea of, ownership and creative autonomy is coming up with the Joe Rogan podcast, which, of course, which was given $100 million from Spotify. And, just to frame this quickly, I think, again, these are really important conversations, because there are podcasts popping up everywhere. And even, in classical music, even in the hardest corners of the real Mozart corners of classical music, their podcasts, so I think it's important for us all to sort of look at what's happening on the big scale, because, that sort of thing, definitely impacts the smaller guys.
So real talk, though, if you gave somebody $100 million, wouldn't you want to be able to have a little bit of editorial muscle over that if you handed out that money?
I mean, yeah, if I had $100 million, but if I'm handing someone $100 million, how much money am I expecting to get back? And I think that's where the argument is. If I'm expecting, $1 trillion back, as the creator, what I'm saying is, well, if you've worked it out for you to get over on the money side, I'm going to do what I want content wise.
Okay. So again, real talk. Would you take $100 million to do a podcast if whoever was giving you that money said that they were going to have editorial control?
That would be difficult for me, because I wouldn't want to be painted into the corner to be anti-black on my podcast, or to say something that I think is hurtful toward my mission and toward my cause. So I know it sounds like the Miss America answer right now, but that's the truth.
$200 million.
There is no amount of money that's going to get me on.
Okay.
I mean, that's like asking me. So let me ask you: Would you be a Tucker Carlson on Fox News for $100 million?
Lord, no.
200 million?
No.
Okay, so that's the same thing. I think it's the same thing anyway. Something similar.
It's similar.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
So what was I talking about? So with Joe Rogan. The argument, he was given this $100 million, and I think I read, and I'll post a link in the description. Folks talking about they're going to strike, people at Spotify saying they're going to strike if they aren't given the right to, have some editing rights over his podcast. And I think where this is coming from is, there are reports of him having given out false information, having guests that are a bit problematic and X, Y, and Z. So, I think that conversation, to circle this all the way back around, again, shout out to Julian Wiley at Current. I think it's important to have that conversation of ownership as we are all creating content, whether that's, recording an album, recording a podcast or anything, and if you're doing it in conjunction with an organization, you should at least think about what would happen to that content.
If you go,
if you go. In preparation, not really in preparation for this, but, just over the weekend, thinking about this Joe Rogan situation, I went back and watched some old episodes of Fear Factor on YouTube. Were you a Fear Factor watcher?
No.
Really? What? So your stomach gets turned easily, or you don't like seeing people covered in spiders? And
I just, it's the pornographication of discomfort.
Sure.
And that's not me. And this is why I think it's great that it's there for people who like that. But I'm not going to go seek it out.
So you were throwing out numbers at me, how much money would it take? So let's say, I remember one of the Fear Factor challenges was that you had to, and if you have a sensitive stomach, maybe turn off your earbuds for a second, having to eat horse rectum in a barn where there are horses. So first of all, I get gagged in there by the smell. When the fair comes through town and Dell wants to go into, I get gagged by being in there, and then I have to eat something that I'm sure is horrible. So let's say for you, $50,000. Can you do it? You thinking?
Wow.
$50,000 on the table.
Well, you know what calamari is, right?
Okay, so, it kind of looked like it too. Really, a big version of it, though.
It's you got to see. It's them putting you in that barn that messes with your head, right? Because you could get in the right headspace to eat.
Right, but it's the barn with the horses neighing and everything.
Okay, question. Did my shoes come off in the plane crash?
Okay.
No. Here's my question. How long do you have to keep it down?
Forever. Well, so, at least for the rest of the day, or while you're there in the barn.
Nobody's looking. Okay, I'm just curious if
you're just trying to get the terms.
I just want to see if there's fine print.
Anyway, we kind of chased the rabbit off the trail there. Joe Rogan to Fear Factor. Anyway, content creators, I said this on Twitter and I said this on Facebook today. Content creators, own your shit. It's very important that you do that. It's more important than anything. I can actually make a musical connection between Fear Factor and classical music. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Eating weird and gross things. The last time I saw a performance of Engelbert Humperdinck's Hansel and Gretel, the last scene is this, children's chorus, and it's all cheery and happy sounding. And this is after the evil witch had been pushed into the oven, and in the version I saw during this song, the cooked witch, comes out of the oven, and it's made of something that the kids can actually eat. So as you have this cheerful orchestral music and the curtain is coming down after 2.5 hours of watching an opera, you're watching kids smear what looks like cooked witch all over their faces like they're eating it. I really enjoyed that. That was an opera moment I will always remember.
$50,000.
So here's a little bit of the conclusion of Engelbert Humperdinck's Hansel and Gretel to get us into the second movement of today's opus. So, Scott, since the last time we recorded, we had the birth date, the born day of one of my favorite composers, top 5, maybe not number 5, Dmitri Shostakovich. So I'm going to take the time to talk about a little of his music in this second movement, and also the music of a black composer, a black American composer, who has a connection to Shostakovich and actually inspired this week's photo for the podcast. So we're going to get into that in a bit. But the first thing I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned, Alicia Keys, another one of my faves.
That's who I thought you were going to lead with.
Her album came out. And I listened to some of the tracks already because there were singles and that sort of thing. But the one I keep going to is called "So Done," and every time I listen to it, Scott, I think about you because of the sound of the guitar in there. It sounds like it could come right out of your basement.
'Cause I'm so done. God in my tongue.
So what my question for you is, between this, there's actually another song on the album that I think we had tried, with the mics off before.
Mm-hmm.
We can go back to the guitar line in DaBaby's song Rockstar. It seems like, at least to my ear, guitar is really getting into the world of hip hop and R&B.
It's having a little renaissance in it.
Is it inspiring your practice or what you try down in your basement?
Well, it just makes me feel like some of the lyrics that I came up with, and I wasn't necessarily able to come up with a melody. Maybe I could zingspiel them,
There you go.
and have my own sort of.
There you go. No, dude. Yeah.
Middle-aged white guy. What would that be? Down. Broken hip hop.
Okay.
Busted ass rhymes. Busted ass rhymes.
You want to continue? Or?
I'm trying to think of my niche. I'm trying to think of what little pocket I might occupy.
Anyway, so shout out to Alicia Keys and shout out to the guitar players. Y'all are out here doing it. And I actually didn't have this planned out, but the next song, a song that everyone I'm sure knows, features some really interesting guitar playing. So you talked about in the last movement the union and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, with my frustrations with that, I mean, whatever, it didn't last long, but, you have moments when you're lying in bed and you're just kind of, tight about something.
I just missed it.
And, right. And, for some reason, one of the songs that popped into my head is Alanis Morissette's You Ought to Know. So let me ask you, Scott, because you were good and grown when this song came out, what lady in your life had you screaming that song in your car by yourself?
There wasn't one, man.
Oh, okay. You just playing cool. You just play it cool. What do you think about what do you think about the song? I mean, what I was talking to Dell earlier. Maybe I was saying this to you. That song seems to be one that sort of superseded culture and genre, and we all just knew that song. I mean, it was that popular.
Right. It seemed to follow the formula that a lot of top 40 chart toppers were getting, where every time you turned on MTV, the video was on at some point, and you go, oh crap! So you flip over to VH1, and they're just starting it. You get in your car, and it's on the radio. So they ran it into the ground. Yeah, it got on my nerves in short order. It's not her best work.
No, sure. Yeah, but what I found just so interesting was that even the most overplayed songs, if you let it lie for about 10, maybe even 15 years, however many years ago that song came out, and you go back to it, you kind of remember and understand why it was played so much, because it is a good song. I know people make that argument about Beethoven and stuff, but
sure.
But I think that's something that you can apply to that song. So yeah, I'm not all that tight anymore, but I just enjoyed revisiting that blast from the past.
I would like to shout out my favorite track by Alanis Morissette called Uninvited.
Okay.
Now, that is raw.
I'm going to have to take another listen to that one. That, as I said, You Ought to Know is one that sort of rose up against, everything else despite genre. But I wasn't so much into Alanis Morissette specifically. So, yeah, I'm gonna take a second look at that Uninvited. Maybe I'll try to get it on my keyboard or whatever. But, of course, I can't go, if you're playing the Triloquy drinking game and you're waiting for me to mention Beyonce, here we are. So in my, revisit back to that tune, You Ought to Know, I remembered, oh my gosh, Beyonce did it. So that's the one that I'm going to share with y'all today. How do you think Beyonce did with that tune?
Oh, she killed it. Better than Alanis did.
You said it.
I did.
You said it.
No. And I'm going to stand by it. But Beyonce's, her breath controlled. I didn't like the breathy delivery.
It was live, and she was dancing and running around.
Right. But in the studio version that Alanis put out, there's all this gasping. And I get what you're trying to say with it. But
if you're as angry as she was, saying, I think that maybe the gasps are a part of this is the You Ought to Know Breakdown podcast.
I'm sure. I'm sure it is part of it, and I didn't care for it.
Remember when she was God in the movie Dogma?
I do. That was great.
That was the last time they made a white lady God for a while, because since then it was brothers.
Look out.
I mean, when you talk about God, I think of Morgan Freeman. Anyway, shall we get into the classical portion of this movement, or do you have another tune to bring up?
No, the one that I wanted to bring in is by Chris Rogerson.
Right.
Yeah, he's a young composer, and this piece called 30,000 Days was written in 2017, and it really warmed me up to listen to it, because we're all having this trouble with marking time right now. We feel unstuck in time, if I can quote Vonnegut for a minute.
Sure.
You talked about how not having a gig, you have to write stuff into your calendar, do this, work on that, or whatever, because otherwise, oh my gosh, 3 days has slipped by, and how is it already Monday?
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're wondering, how is it only Monday?
Right.
So this strange way of marking time in this pandemic has really messed with my mind. And then to read about this piece called 30,000 Days, Chris said his father was a statistician, and he liked to think of life as a 30,000-day journey. Mm-hmm. And whenever him and his sister would reach one of these marks, his father would call them and talk to them, tell them stories about his own 10,000th day or 20,000th day or something like that. And Chris said that the biggest impact that it had on him was having the realization of the value of looking at life from a broader perspective. So that's what he did with 30,000 Days. He said he explores this idea of life's three stages. And, we talk about composers, in their early period and their middle period and whatever the case may be. But he said he tried to evoke the joy, innocence, and sweetness of youth. The second is struggle, coldness, fury, and finally is acceptance, resignation, loss, and love. And it's really nice the way he threaded all these things together in it.
It must be something that people have listened to this piece and explored, because in one Google search I found 10,000 days old calculator. So have you already calculated when your 10,000th day was?
I haven't. I think it was around like age 27, isn't it? Something like that. And my buddy, shout out to Mike Friedman I believe he's in Dayton, Ohio. He wrote in and he said that right around 82 would be 30,000 days. And I said, then I'm really shooting for more like a 27,000 day lifespan.
Oh, but see, the more you wish for that, you're going to make it to something like 50,000 days. So be
Man,
careful.
don't do that.
I think, so if you're saying around the age 27, that would have been 2014 for me. So that was when I was... Wow, was that when I got into radio? That was maybe that's when I got into the Knoxville Symphony. I don't know. But for profound things to be happening at these markers, I think is an interesting concept. So yeah, shout out to that piece of music and Chris Rogerson. That'll definitely be on the Triloquy Tracks playlist. So be sure to check that out. I wanted to spend just a little time before we get into today's interview, honoring a bit of the canon. So when we talk about, and bringing back up this Daniel Elder piece, okay, when we talk about erasing white men, that's a farce, because there's music of dead white men whose is eternal and is still greatly celebrated by many people. I think the kicker is, does that music matter still? Is there a relevance to the music? Can it be applied to today? So when we talk about the music of Dmitri Shostakovich, I see that all over the place. So, as I mentioned, his birthday passed since the last time we recorded. One of my favorite composers. So I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about a really important piece of music of his Ninth Symphony. So when we talk about a Ninth Symphony, especially when it comes to Beethoven, what would you expect? What sort of piece of music?
Well, a chorus and some epic themes.
Something
and
big, yeah.
Big fanfares, yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually what Shostakovich planned on, but, because of Soviet Russia, and Stalining and all of that stuff, it didn't quite turn out that way. And in the fourth movement of this 5-movement symphony, there's this music that really exemplifies that reality in a way that I think is very impactful. You have this heavy brass that's representing the iron fist, the arm of the Soviet government against one person who dares speak up against the regime. And as that movement goes on, you have more of that dialogue between heavy machine, big machine, and individual. And, in Shostakovich's sort of, twisted mind or just raw reality, he transitions this, solo bassoon, this lone voice against the machine, into sort of saying, oh well, might as well go to work. I can't change anything. Shostakovich never, at least as far as I know, wrote like a bassoon sonata or a bassoon solo piece of any sort, but he was definitely very friendly to the bassoon in his orchestral writing. Playing that solo, the recording I actually shared, with the University of Southern California Orchestra years ago, really one of the highlights of my life, a moment that I will never forget. I will always honor, the story of Shostakovich. I encourage everyone to read more about his story and the way that he stood up against Stalin, and how he eventually gave in, or was he forced to join that regime, or so there's an interesting story there. So I'm spending the time to bring him up and to just speak to my appreciation for his music as a way of saying to folks like Daniel Elder, it's not that we're trying to erase white men out of here. There is just a playing field that requires more than that mediocrity that got people along beforehand. And this is not the Triloquy. I don't want to turn this into that, but the music of Shostakovich. I mean, think about the connections, the parallels parallels between, the Red Scare and, the Soviet Union and whatever you want to draw up and what's going on today. The idea of fighting against the big machine as that movement of music portrays. So I don't know. Shout out to Dmitri Shostakovich. Rest in peace. Long live the music of Dmitri Shostakovich. Now, I always have to add in a little bit of blackness. So during the, as much as I can anyway, so during the Cold War, the height of all this drama, a group of composers from America was sent to the Soviet Union as ambassadors, as cultural ambassadors. One of them was a black composer named Ulysses K. And when he returned to the United States from that trip, he came back with Shostakovich, and there's a photo. I want to shout out the folks at WBUR. I'll link the article that I read that enlightened me to this. When Ulysses K returned and Shostakovich was there, Ulysses K's daughter named Virginia met them, there, and there's this photo of a little girl, Virginia, giving Shostakovich this bouquet of flowers. So, even with, this music from Western Europe that, is by a dead white man, but still speaks to me, there's a connection there that can be made to blackness and black classical music. What if we all worked as hard to really find those connections? We talk about white men talk about, oh, you're trying to erase us. Well, in what ways are you trying to uplift others? What connections can you help us find toward the goal of our more equitable programming, our more equitable view of so-called classical music? It's always there. It's just, do you want to take the effort to do it,
That's a good point. But also the fellow that was speaking at that forum where he was talking about how white men are under siege or were
maybe another one of the things that we covered, this story again.
Right. No. So what I'm saying is, was it an ACF, American Composers Forum
thing? Town hall I was telling you about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the guy was coming up lamenting the fact that he was under siege. Well, it just means that you're going to be judged on the same. Your work you can't ride on just being white anymore. You're going to have to create some good art.
In fewer circles, black people don't have to work 3 and 4 times as hard to be seen. Our art, our content, hopefully our content that we own, again, going back to the first movement, is there to be consumed on this equal playing field of social media, the internet, virtual whatever, it's all there. So, your stuff actually has to be worth a damn. And then, I can connect Ulysses K to so many other things. It's William Grant Still, I believe, who encouraged Ulysses K to go to Yale University and study with the composer Paul Hindemith, who has a very specific sound. If you're familiar with Paul Hindemith's
Metamorphosis.
Music. Yeah, Symphonic Metamorphosis is my jam. And, that sound really comes out in Ulysses K's music. So I wanted to just present an example of that as it applies to his bassoon sonata. This recording actually features my teacher, who you've met, Lacolian Washington, Mark Inslee on piano. Just a little bit of this. And if you're familiar with Paul Hindemith, I think you'll see how Ulysses K's music sort of sounds like it. All right, a lot of gabbing, so we're going to get into this third movement. Again, a reminder, the Sphinx Organization, which we talk about so much on this podcast. Huge shout out to Alpha Dworkin, who runs the ship over there. Their virtual gala is coming up on October 15th, I believe. If that's incorrect, the correct date will be on the website. And a part of that of that gala will include performances by the Exigence ensemble, which we've already showcased in this opus, and also a performance of a work by Carlos Simon, a black composer born and based down, I don't know if born, but based down in Atlanta, Georgia, a composer of all sorts of really phenomenal music. There's going to be one of his solo violin works performed at this gala. But to get us into my conversation with him, I wanted to share with you a work of his called A Man. So Scott, a black composer who lives in Atlanta, and this piece of music, this arrangement for wind ensemble, is called Amen. So what do you expect just right out of the gate?
Exaltation.
It's definitely got that, bluesy Southern, dare I say, sexy feel written and inspired in that feel in a church, which Carlos actually goes into in our conversation. So here's a little bit of that. Definitely look up the full performance. There'll be a link to this specific performance in the description of this opus. But here's a little excerpt of the piece of music called Amen by Carlos Simon as we get into my conversation with him.
Well, I come from a lineage of 4-generation lineage of Pentecostal preachers. Starting my great-grandfather, born in 1896, and he actually started a church organization which is based in Pentecostal denomination belief. That the Holy Ghost. It's
amen.
Coming of the Holy Ghost, that sort of thing. So I was sort of reared in this tradition of Pentecostalism and expressionism in the church and worship services. And so, I wanted to encapsulate that experience as much as I could, because I knew that people they weren't aware of this unique American experience. And so I desperately wanted to capture the language, without being a caricature or, because you see these types of scenes where you're in the black church in movies and, people are just, it wasn't genuine to me, and I wanted to be sincere in my piece. Amen. And so that is just an encapsulation of a typical church service. What I've experienced on Sunday morning, 3-hour service into 12 minutes.
At least, right?
Yeah. And so, it's really based in that, and it's so rich to me, and I wanted people to experience the same thing.
It's interesting that you mentioned, making a caricature out of certain aesthetics and certain sounds, because that's actually, the next thing I had planned on asking you about. How do you take the experiences, the unique Black American experiences that you've had, translate them into music without going into that area of performative, blackness and making a caricature out of these black aesthetics of jazz, gospel, blues, everything that you put into that piece and so many other of your pieces?
Yeah, well, I feel like the work needs to be done on my part, really trying to understand and dig deep. I did a lot of reading, and a lot of research and some of the scholarly things to connect with my memory of things. And so there's certain things that I chose not to do. Mm-hmm. Easily that last movement could have been the entire piece, where it's just like jubilation and, people clapping and the running bass line. And, that could easily have been the whole piece in itself. But, that's not all it was. That moment there is just a small segment of this of the experience, and you have to build to that. You can't. It's more like evoking the Spirit of God. Mm-hmm. It was very serious to me. That moment was very serious. Something you didn't take lightly. And so when I see these things on TV and they're mimicking it, that it was real. That was not fake. It was not an entertaining moment, So you had to, so for me, I've always wanted to be sincere about the things that I write, and doing scholarly work, and also really, the hard work, understanding and listening is just what I want to say. Will someone be offended by this if I release this and they heard it, or somebody, when I say offended, when I offended if they were a part of this community.
Right.
Would they be
right.
offended by this type of music? In other words, would it be an appropriation?
Right, right. And it's
yeah.
very important to make that point, people that are a part of that community.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and I was so impressed by, you know, the orchestration, or I guess I should say the bandstration of the arrangement. I heard, you know, before I, you know, was sort of known as the guy who is always wearing the cape for Black artistry, Black so-called classical music and all that sort of thing. You know, I was really pushing to put new music and music by living composers out to the front, and even more specifically, music for wind band. It's sort of this corner of the art form that we don't really spend as much time with as we do with the orchestra or chamber music or the piano. Do you have any specific affinities to wind band or music for wind ensemble?
You know what? Honestly, that this form is new to me. You know, Amen was my first band piece, actually.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, I in high school, I heard the band, the marching band, that sort of thing. And I grew to love it, but I never thought I would be writing for the ensemble, just because it's so difficult. You know, the balance of just wind instruments it's hard to kind of capture, to balance, and you have to really know what you're doing. So I kind of strayed away from it for a while. But I know the band world, you know, as far as the new music, they're a little more open to playing new music, you know, and so like more so than the orchestral world. And so I knew this was the Amen in particular was a piece that could be done in this band world, just because it's more reception towards new music.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm answering your question though.
Oh no, that's great. I think you're exactly right when you talk about, you know, music for wind band and wind band people being, you know, more in tune with newer music, because that's what, you know, we play most of the time in the wind band world, newer music. I wonder if any of those challenges translate over into the orchestral world, or maybe the chamber music world, when you talk about incorporating new sounds and maybe even contemporary conversations, like in the elegy that you wrote not too long ago.
You know, it's all one, you know, piece of art. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
They all have different challenges, and each piece has a different. They all have different possibilities, and so, but you know, I always, whenever I start a piece, it's always, you know, me just doing the scholarly work, of course, and what I want to say, and I just sit with that for, you know, several weeks, maybe even months, and you know, before I even write a note, you know, I just kind of sit with the idea, and then I'd sit down at the piano and I improvise based on what I've kind of digested. And it's just like a brain dump after I, you know, do all the work here, and just I go and I don't analyze anything, and it sort of comes out naturally, and and that's the approach I take with every piece that I write, and so they're whether it's wind band, whether it's orchestra music, whether it's chamber or solo, you know, vocal music. Any of these types of things, it's more so, you know, I'm making room for the unexplained, if you will, the spiritual stuff that happens. I think it's spiritual. Other people may disagree with me, but I think it's no other way to explain, you know, being able to capture these things in my head and whatever, you know. It's for me that's just my experience, but
I want to go a little deeper into this elegy that I've mentioned. So for folks who don't know, you know, you wrote this in honor of the late Michael Brown, the late Trayvon Martin, and the late Eric Garner. So you've already mentioned that, you know, a part of your process is just doing the scholarly work, sitting with yourself and having that spiritual moment. You know, what was that experience as it related to this piece in particular? You know, is it internalizing pain? Is it internalizing hope? What is it?
So when the verdict dropped for Trayvon Martin, you know, I I was just shocked beyond belief. Like, here's this man can get off scot-free, and like it was just like it could happen to me as a Black man. I was frustrated. I was angry. I was, was hurt. And Freddie Gray, when things, the riots happened in Baltimore, and I was watching this all on news on CNN, and it's like, wow, this is I was torn up, I was physically sick too. I felt sick when I was watching these things. So when I wrote Elegy, it was more of a therapeutic thing. I wanted to kind of get these emotions out and just really, really just, detox, if you will, try to get the feelings out, and so, it's the same thing, I just kind of sat at the piano and played what I felt. It was more in the moment, of course I was digesting all of these things on via media and social media and all these things. And to think, now 2020, we're still the names of that list have grown exponentially. Taylor, George Floyd, and just so many. And the piece itself, still for me, it still is therapy. When I go back and listen to it, and which is what I didn't expect for that sort of language to come out, because it's very lush and harmonically speaking, but it's something that I guess at the moment was here, and I just didn't want to bring that down, if you will.
Okay, yeah, it's so interesting that you describe that as, getting all of those feelings out. What is your experience listening to it or maybe seeing it performed, or, has anyone talked to you about the experience of performing it with that in mind, feelings out for you, but maybe feelings in for audiences and performers?
Sure, yeah. I remember, one performance that happened last February at the Sphinx Connect conference, and they performed the piece, and Red Shoe Company, and we at the end of the concert, I'm greeting people and shaking hands and that sort of thing, and one woman came to me. She was tears in her eyes, and she just like just boohooing, and she had a friend with her, and she was like just completely, she couldn't really speak, she was just like boohooing, and come to find out her brother had been shot by the police like a week before, African American, and she heard the piece and she was just couldn't contain it. It was just like emotions. And so it was really fresh at that moment. And so, those type of experiences I can't plan for. It's no like, so I'm just happy that she was able to get something out of it and connect with it, whether it's the pain and hopefully some type of emotional resolution, and just dealing with it. So I can't say exactly, but the fact that she was able to connect with it, and through concert classical music, and so it means the world to me.
Yeah, and I think that's what really makes works like that unique, because for so long the concert hall, both physically and I guess philosophically, was this space of escape, was this space where that the outside world didn't belong in. And you're, of course, one of many composers who have now addressed things like police brutality through composition. What's your reaction to the idea that some have, that many still have, that issues like these don't belong in those spaces, don't belong in the concert halls or the opera houses or wherever?
Oh gosh, you know what? I think it's it's about stories and it's about culture and documenting culture. You know, I think as a composer, that's one of my job. What's my job? You know, and as artists, really to document the history. And 100, 200 years from now, people will look back and say, "Hey, this happened in America because these composers were talking about it, or these artists were singing about it." You know, it's so we're part of the culture, and so no matter the venue, I feel like it's important for artists, composers, performers, conductors to be able to speak about these things in whatever venue, and so it doesn't matter. I feel, especially now, it's important for us to be vocal about our individual convictions. And yeah, so that it's important, definitely important.
You mentioned Sphinx Connect a few minutes ago, and I think I would like to sort of transition into talking about the Sphinx Organization, the gala that's coming up, and everything surrounding it. Sphinx is a word, is a name that Scott and I mention a lot on this podcast. Scott even went to his first Sphinx earlier this year. For folks who are still unfamiliar with this huge organization, this really impactful organization, how would you describe it? What is Sphinx?
Family. It's in one word. It's family, man. It just feels like one big family reunion, and so you just have a collection of just amazing artists and musicians from across the globe, really, and we're all doing different things, but yet the same things in our own spaces, if you will. And it's like a collection. We all come together, and it's like experiencing the same thing, and we're like, oh, you're doing the same over here in Mexico, or I'm doing this over here in DC. It's the exact same thing, but in a different location. And so it's really a collection of, I guess, the brightest and the most talented musicians and artists. And whenever I go, it has always felt like a big family reunion. The first year I went, I didn't know anybody, honestly, other than my classmates who I studied with at the University of Michigan. And, just me being there introduced me to many different people. I walked away from that conference with, many friends, lifelong friends. And so it's an experience. And so I always look forward to it.
Yeah. It's one thing to, come together for things like Sphinx Connect, that conference as a performing musician, someone who goes on stage and plays with the Sphinx Orchestra and all those sorts of things. But it's another thing to come from, certain parts of the field that are a little more solitary. I think about concert pianists, and I also think about composers. Much of your time is spent, I imagine, in front of a score or a computer screen. How much more impactful for you is community with that in mind? Is attending this so-called family reunion even more important, considering how you spend most of your time in music?
Yeah, absolutely. I could very well must be in my man cave here. Yep. And most composers, we spend our time just in four walls and just sort of and it's a very solitary profession, and so I kind of have to force myself to be out. If it wasn't for my wife, I would just be here. Like I wouldn't even know COVID happened. It's happening rather. And so I think it's important to be out and to experience and to be social. But the question is really about community and being able to have some type of connection with other, even collaboration, if you will. But and so I just bring it down to composing. So when I'm writing a piece, I don't like to write in in a box where like I'm writing and then I'm going to send a piece and that's it. No, there's a constant collaboration between me and the performer, whoever the commissioning body is, whether it's a conductor or a violinist or whatever. It's so that in a way it strengthens connections and friendship. I build friendships from that, and it's trust, and from that, it builds out. That conductor will take it to another orchestra, and who will then, another violinist or trombonist will hear my work, and then they'll want to play my music, and so it's like it grows. As far as that's more of a macro view, when it comes to community and African American community, I think it's important to be supporters of our artists, other artists, African American artists, because it's we have to be there for each other, and in this, especially during this time, and being able to champion each other's work and just be there. I think that's important for sure.
Yeah, the networking aspect of the annual conference is certainly, one of my favorite things about it, and I think one of the more important. But of course, Sphinx Connect, the conference, is just one of the things that happens over the course of a year within the Sphinx Organization. Something else that happens is actually coming up soon on October 15th, the Sphinx Gala, which is actually virtual this year because of COVID and other things. And this gala is actually going to include a performance of one of your works called Between Worlds. Now, first of all, is this a world premiere of Between Worlds?
It's not. Actually, it was commissioned by the Irving B. Klein competition. Happens every year. It's a string competition, very prestigious. And they commissioned me to write a suite of solo string pieces. So it was one for solo violin, viola, double bass, and cello. But the piece itself is it's one title for 4 different pieces, really, and inspired by the visual art of Bill Traylor.
Oh, that's interesting because, when it comes to that title, Between Worlds, and if I was, pretending I was in a concert hall somewhere without access to you or your perspectives on this, I guess my assumptions would push me more toward the idea of code switching, between worlds when it comes to traversing, everything when it comes to being a person of color, especially in the arts. Is there at least a hint of that idea embedded in this composition?
Yeah, well, it really is. So Bill Traylor, he was born in 1853, but died in 1949. So he lived a very long life and saw a lot. Yeah, he was born a slave in Alabama, of all places. And so he lived to see, the Civil War. He lived to see the Reconstruction. He lived to see Jim Crow. And he saw a lot in American culture. So I can imagine, he living between different worlds, old and new, black and white. And then, he was born a slave. And so he worked on cotton fields, and so rural. But he also moved to Montgomery or moved around to different cities. So rural and urban, so he's between these different disparate worlds, seemingly, but and so I wanted to implant that into the piece, and so you'll hear many different types of moods, if you will, but it's this collection of it's still, I guess, in the character of, as I imagine, of this very just lost my train of thought. He's really, this world gross, he's seen a lot, pretty much, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if any of that is a little personal for you, because we began this conversation with your mentioning your own lineage that you can trace back into the late 19th century. Do you think of your own family members in relation to the person who, this piece was built around? When we talk about different worlds, I don't know if you have records or knowledge of family members of yours, who were born into slavery, but surely, someone who lived in 1896, I think the year that you threw out there, someone who lived during that time would experience some very similar things, as they go over the course of their lives, even if the plantation was not a part of it.
Mm. No, it wasn't based on anybody that I've always been really just intrigued by these stories that come out of slavery and especially artists in general. Right. If you see his work, it's so provocative, but yet it has a simplistic nature to it. He was a self-taught artist, and so he used whatever he had, whether it's cardboard or and actually, you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, Garrett, my dad, one of the things he does as a hobby is he draws, and he was basically a self-taught artist. So there's a connection there. Yes, you should be my therapist, because there's a drawing.
my therapist would say that's a bad idea, but and I want to definitely shout out Hannah White, who is going to be giving this performance, a phenomenal musician. So shout out to her. I wonder why you think works like these, Between Worlds, is important to hear at a Sphinx gala. There are things like Beethoven sonatas that exist. Why is a piece of music like this so important to hear under the umbrella of a gala like this for the Sphinx Organization?
Sure. Well, it's all about the stories, man, and having representation of these stories. Yes, we could play both Beethoven or Mozart, but that's not representative of the stories that come out of American culture. And so, I think it's important to document these stories. And that's one key mission of the Sphinx Organization is to be supporters of artists and Black and Latinx descent, and to really support them in whatever their endeavors. And so that means curating their stories and sharing their stories. You know what I mean? So it's important.
Yeah. I definitely want to give you the opportunity to, plug all of your things and tell folks how they can get in contact with you or commission you for new works. But, I felt like I would be remiss if I didn't personally congratulate you for the award that you recently got from the Sphinx Organization. I wonder if you could paint the picture of receiving notification that you got this Medal of Honor alongside what I'll call a pretty substantial cash prize. What was that day like for you, finding out that you won?
Gosh, it was surreal, man. Like I'm still. It in general, it takes a while for news to sort of catch up with me. It happens, and then I'm like just blank, because I don't know how to react to it, because I'm just kind of slow with my emotions. But that whole day was just me sort of like trying to grapple with the idea of what do I do now? I had this platform, what's the responsibility of this now? Like I had this platform to say something, to help someone, and all of these emotions. And yes, I'm excited that this cash prize and the recognition. But that comes with the price. I have to. I'm using it now to change and to help people understand. And so it's important. Man, I'm still sort of as you can see, I'm sort of speechless by it still.
Yeah. I mean, it's really phenomenal. How can people sort of keep up with what you have on the horizon and check out what you plan to do with this new platform, this new time, these new resources you have?
Yeah. Well, you can find me on Instagram, Simon Composer. That's my handle, or my website, coliversimon.com. And yeah.
Great, that's phenomenal. But before I let you go, I wanted to ask you, one more thing. We're at the intersection of so much right now. COVID, new discussions of race, police brutality, unemployed musicians, unemployed people in general. What are your words? And we talk about the support and really supporting artists, specifically artists of color. What are your words? What is your advice to the person just on the brink of an adventure or a new adventure in light of everything that's happening? We can't crowd the concert hall. There's so many things that we can't do, but maybe there are things that we can do as artists during this time.
Yeah, well, I've seen so many amazing concerts via online, and I'm sure you have too. It's and people have been using the internet and social media as a platform to share and of course, that's one way. I think is important. We still have to keep that sense of community in that way. But one thing that I've appreciated, is just the idea of live music being in person. And I think we've been missing that. And so, the New York Philharmonic, what they did is they rented a truck. And they've gone down to all 5 boroughs of the city, New York City, and they got this collection of artists, like a string trio, and they just went around, played, and then they left for like 30. They played for like 30 minutes and then left. Well, they commissioned me to write a piece that was inspired by COVID, and so I wrote a piece called The Loop, or Loop is what it's called, and it's really about the monotony of being in at home. And so again, it's really, so that experience of having live music to a community for however long, that's whether it's short or you can't really be long because you don't want people to gather, but
right.
I think as artists, you have to really be good stewards of your community. And so just being able to perform for 5 minutes outside, that I think that does a world to people, and just it's so important to kind of keep that music alive with a small group of people, and it's important, I think.
Yeah, just doing what you can, I guess, is what I'm hearing.
That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you, Garrett. I appreciate it.
It's what we Black folks have always done, I guess, doing what we can with what we got.
That's right, sir. That's right.
Carlos, it's been a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I think I saw, Scott, I think the last Sphinx, the one we were at in February, I saw Carlos Los, as he told me to call him. I saw Los over in the distance, and how crowded it gets. I couldn't get over there to him. But when he describes Sphinx as a family, it's just that. And full disclosure, Sphinx gets plenty of critiques, I'm sure Alpha and the whole team over there are familiar with that. But at the end of the day, the people who go to Sphinx Connect every year and network and commune, there's really nothing like it. Wouldn't you be sad if the Sphinx Connect you went to this past February is the last one because of COVID? And
it was a good time, and I met a lot of great people. And even this virtual gala, you're going to be involved with that, right?
I'll just be attending. I'm not involved. But,
okay.
Yeah.
So, is that even going to be the same? Is that going to be good enough, to get that interaction that like what you get at the actual convening?
Well, good enough, I don't know. The same, absolutely not. That's the thing. But what is the choice?
Yeah.
And, we've talked about so many times, I'm thinking about Lee Kuntz right now over the Gateways Music Festival, how he talked about making a way out of no way.
Yeah.
That's what we do,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, let's get into this triloquy.
As you probably could have guessed by this moment, I have decided in 2020 to run for president.
All right, Scott. So we had a pretty, I don't want to say a heated conversation, but a very energized conversation concerning what I planned on bringing into the triloquy today.
Oh, now I remember.
So we started again with a quote from the late Shirley Chisholm. Let's reprise that.
I cannot believe that this administration would have ever been elected 4 years ago if we had known then what we know today. But we are entering a new era in which we must, as Americans, demand stature and size in our national leadership. Leadership which is open and leadership which is receptive to the problems of all Americans.
Now, I think that phrase, all Americans, is very important. All Americans. I got my ballot for president in the mail, and when I opened it, alongside opening the notification that my health care benefits were, running out in a couple days, at the end of the month, something in me just sort of snapped. And I thought to myself, well, obviously for me, voting for Trump is not something I'm interested in doing. Is voting for Biden something that's going to directly benefit me? Now, we're on the heels, again, in this moment when I'm in my mailbox of me thinking about, this union at your job, which hopefully, will offer so many protections, maybe even artistic and content autonomy for you guys. But, how I just missed the boat, even though that, I was a part of the development of that. I think, that on top of the fact that I think my termination gives the need for that strength, and for me to not be the beneficiary of that, even though I am, a part of the other side of it, it made me think about that with voting. Is voting for Biden actually going to benefit me? And then, of course, in Minnesota, Kanye West actually made the ballot, and we were talking about me saying, well, fuck it, I'm just going to vote for Kanye West, because fuck all of this. But, I don't know if I'm there, but I think the hard pill, Scott, that so many people have to swallow is that the idea of voting for Biden is not going to benefit me either, so I'm not going to vote. That is more pervasive than people are willing to admit, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that, I understand why, you believe that, voting for one candidate is going, to be so important in the long run. I get that. I'm not saying I'm throwing my vote away. I'm not saying I'm not voting for Joe Biden. What I am saying is it's hard for me to, in good faith, even participate in a system at this point under some promise of it working out when there is no evidence of that. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. And I disagree.
Go ahead.
I think that the change that you want and that people of color want, that everybody wants, if you throw your vote to Kanye, which is, I'm not going to tell you how to vote. That's 100% on you. But again, I think that the kind of change that you're after, instead of being maybe 8 or 12 years, away,
Okay.
is going to be not in your lifetime.
When I think about, people's justifications, the reasons they give millennials and other younger folks to, hold their nose and vote for a candidate that they don't believe will do anything for them. I've seen, you're not voting for Biden, you're voting for Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement. Unfortunately, she's gone already. and she will be replaced by Trump. So that's not the reason. Other people have said this is important to save our democracy. And when I hear that, I think about these growing tent villages around the Twin Cities because folks can't pay their rent. You said they're starting to pop up over in the park where you walk Radar.
Yeah, in the last couple of weeks, it's gone from 4 to 16, I'd say.
And my purview, we are already living in a democracy that does not work. So I just don't want, and I think I said this here before, I'll say it again, I don't want Biden and Harris getting the White House to cool anyone down. We were talking earlier also, about this Wagner week. I put them out there on Instagram a little bit. In connection with this, I just wanted to acknowledge that there is actually one little excerpt of music by Wagner that I appreciate. At the end of the Ring cycle, there's this beautiful chorale that while you're listening to it, you're seeing the world being destroyed. That's what I want at the end of the day. Maybe not the world being destroyed, but this system that doesn't work for so many of us, to get out of here. Again, Shirley Chisholm did not say some Americans; she said all Americans, and that's something that I am going to really live with, and I hope that you will live with that and think about, even if you feel like participating in this system, this voting system is your best way of making a change. I hope you'll still think about the folks who will never see the benefits of any of this. I want a reason to celebrate that music of Wagner's in which the world is being destroyed. I'll give it to y'all then. Here, that this is my deal, Scott. I will say something nice about Wagner when we burn all this shit down.